There's a pretty one, Ulysses. There it is.
Hello BookTube, I'm Shawn the Book Maniac. Welcome back to my channel. Here I am with a review of Ann Patchett's latest novel, The Dutch House, published in 2019. I read this as part of my duties as one of the many judges for the BookTube Prize in 2020. And so I'm filming this just a couple days after I finished reading it, but it won't be published on my channel until the embargo is lifted for the semi-final round at the very end of July. You'll be seeing this review in August. I'm filming it June 26th or something like that. This is my second novel by Ann Patchett. I read Bel Canto about 4 years ago, and I was really quite swept up in it, and then the epilogue virtually ruined that novel for me. And then as I have matured as a reader, my opinion of the entire novel has kind of deteriorated. I don't think it was a very good novel. But that's not what I'm here to talk about. I am here to talk about The Dutch House, her latest work. I did my best to approach it with an open mind, and I thought that it started out really engrossingly with a story about these young children living with their father, abandoned by their mother, living in this humongous mansion that had been built early in the 20th century, I believe, by Dutch Americans in New York State. And they're living in it. It was kind of difficult to get the time of the story, but I think it was in the 50s maybe that the family moved in. And then the mother left and the father remarried. But the history of the house was fascinating, and the actual house itself was just this architectural monstrosity that very few of the characters in the novel were completely comfortable living in. The father had a war injury that made walking difficult. I don't think he ever visited the top floor of the house that he lived in for the last decades of his life. It was just a weird, fascinating scenario. And the relationship between the older sister Maeve and the narrator of the story, whose name is rarely mentioned, so I don't remember, Danny. I think his name is Danny, but don't quote me on that. He's about 10 and she's about 17 or something when the story opens. And their relationship was really quite poignant for much of the story. I thought it was really well done. Even if I didn't really understand their characters particularly, and I'll get to more of that in a moment, I really could feel how much they loved each other. It was really affecting the closeness of this sibling relationship. And unfortunately, that's where the compliments end, because I thought this was one of the worst novels I have read since I judged some of the crap for the BookTube Prize last year. What the hell is this? It's actually a very simple story about family and a stepmom that didn't treat her stepkids very well, and the death of a father and a bunch of family secrets, but she botched it so badly by the way that she told the story. I just felt when I was reading it, she was exerting herself. Ann Patchett was exerting herself so awkwardly to make the story different from all the other books that have been written about these kinds of situations, so that it was actually stupid and boring. And she had so much to work with, but the house thing, just the way that was spun out, because there was servants from the original Dutch owners that when the father bought this house in the 50s or whenever it was, he also kept on the servants, and then they continued to the novel, but they would disappear for 75 pages and then come back. But are we supposed to care about these servants? Ann Patchett didn't make me care about them. And there was one in particular that there was an accident in the kitchen, and Fluffy, and she accidentally injured Danny when he was a small boy, and she got fired. And then we find out she was sleeping with the father before he got married to the stepmom, and then she comes back decades later, and she's just weird and poorly drawn, and it didn't make any sense. And like I say, the mother, Danny and Maeve's mother, left, but she was I can't remember the last time I've read a novel with a character so dismally unrealized as the mother. Never mind the father. Who are these people? I could feel that Maeve and her brother Danny loved each other. I couldn't feel anything else that this story had in it. Now, let's be fair. There was a couple moments where one character, I'm not going to say anything spoilery, so one character has an illness, a chronic illness, and there's a moment where that character has a health emergency where quite a few of the other characters suddenly came alive and were human, and I thought that that was a moving scene. But that was for a few pages. The rest of it, they were like dull, paper thin, and nothing made sense. It was such a far-fetched story. I'm quoting somebody that I love from BookTube, used that adjective. Like the story of the mother and where all that went, and just at every point where the story kind of took a bizarre turn, it was just like there was inane narratological acrobatics that just, why are you doing this? What is this for? Why? It didn't make sense. It didn't resonate. And just another really important example of this disconnect, this disjuncture between the way the story unfolded and the fact that these characters didn't cohere. Danny, the main character, if that's his name, he meets the love of his life, Celeste, on the train. And she is just instantly lovable. And the next thing we know, and the way that Patchett moved from a really vivid scene where I could really capture Celeste's character, that first meeting, and then she goes almost immediately after into really detached, dispassionate, expository narration where they become a couple, and then we get basically a potted narrative, like I say, just exposition that despite Danny's sister Maeve and Celeste really connecting at first, there was an intense rivalry between them, and we know very quickly the ultimate fate of the marriage between Celeste and Danny. And it's like, huh? Other than the scene that I have talked about where there was a health emergency, we never really got a scene with those three characters that made any of that visceral, so it didn't make sense. She was a delightful woman, but every reference to Celeste thereafter, she's kind of a pain, and she's really negative, and the rivalry, I mean, there's a cliche about sisters-in-law or whatever, but it just didn't seem like Ann Patchett herself was curious enough to show any nuance, depth to the relationships, even between Danny and his wife, so that when we get to the point where we find out the ending, which I won't say whether it was happy or not, in that marriage, or in the relationship between the two sisters-in-law, didn't care. It was just so limp and weak. It was so unconvincingly summed up in a way that just kind of made me ill. I guess one of the themes that Ann Patchett is trying to explore in this novel is incuriosity. That many of the characters, especially the protagonist, is just not that curious for much of the story. Like, he doesn't realize that the two maids that have raised him, basically, in the house were sisters until, like, years had gone by. Just and there's not only him, but especially him, just obtuse. But the more I read and the more I thought about it, because I was really trying to figure out, why isn't this working? And I, without trying to psychoanalyze Ann Patchett, I just felt that Ann Patchett was not curious. Or if she was, it did not transmit into anything that was visceral, like so that everything was kind of cardboardy. The jerky plot and the weird strokes of character that just didn't make a portrait of anybody that was alive enough to care about. Very disappointing. 2 stars. What does it say on the cover? The Sunday Times says her finest novel yet, and that really makes me sad because I think it might be true. Thanks for watching.